Yeah, and you're a minute early, Gene. So
In
nice
fact,
one.
Sorry for breaking into your meetup here. Did I miss the first talk?
No.
You've not. No.
No,
Okay, great.
you're bang on time.
Perfect. And then, so if that's the case, then I don't need to be host, right?
No, but to share your screen, you will be, because so that we don't have random people try and share their screen.
So Liam is host, but staff
You're
and
co-host.
speakers are just as co-host. So when the talks are on and we force everyone to mute, we allow you to have a few controls that we don't allow everybody to have.
Awesome. I have no responsibilities outside of that, right? I don't need to let people in, so forth.
No, that's fine. We'll take care of it. You just take the power that you want. It's all
Right
good.
on.
Yeah.
Thank you. Well, then I will mute up, and I'm looking forward to the talk.
Yeah, we are as well.
Thank you.
Very much so.
Yay.
So I'll give it another 5 minutes or so before we kick stuff off properly, because we've got a lot of people joining, and admittedly, on Meetup alone, we have 130 RSVPs. So it's probably a good thing we're not doing this in person at our usual venue at the moment, because we wouldn't fit everybody.
Or it'd be far too hot again.
So warm.
That's a bit of an in-joke for anybody that doesn't understand it or has been to our offices. They're always disgustingly warm. I can't turn the bloody radiators down. So this is better. You can ambience your own rooms, which obviously is great.
How's everybody's month been, really, I guess, since the last time we were all together? Earth, I know you had a baby.
Yeah,
that's incredible. You should tell science.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I was going to say, I'm just a survivor at the moment. First day back at work after paternity, and it's like, I need more sleep.
I think that's probably going to be your tagline for like the next few years.
Yeah.
So maybe just like get
forever.
it, you know, yeah, written on your head.
Yeah.
Don't bother me. Need more sleep.
Yeah.
For sure, yeah.
Aww. Very cool. I like your background, Irfan. I've not seen that one before. Unless that's your actual room, which...
It's my actual room.
Yeah.
It's not really. No.
I
wish.
Deep
getting all kinds of jealous.
I wish.
The library.
My library, yeah.
Yes. Looks like you should be in some kind of like smoking jacket and with a cigar or something, you know, to be in keeping.
Yeah. Well, that's why I live in the middle of nowhere. It's for cigars and smoking jackets.
Oh, good. Is that a prerequisite?
Ah, absolutely. If you live in a lower middle class village in Leicestershire, you need to own your very own smoking jacket and a wingback chair.
Oh, excellent. Do they send those to you, or you know?
I think they just come with a house.
Supplier. Oh, good.
Yeah.
Excellent. Feel free to talk amongst yourselves.
I must be missing a trick then. I don't ever remember owning the wingback chair or anything like that.
It's okay this time.
I would write and complain.
Yeah, I'm technically Leicester. I grew up in Leicestershire, so the Leicestershire village. So.
Cool.
I am not in Leicestershire, so I don't think I can expect a wingback chair.
I think the only person further away than you, Misha, is Jean.
Yeah. Yeah, probably.
That's because he's in another country.
Yeah. Well, yeah, being in Yorkshire, I got a care package of like, you know, Yorkshire tea and how to pronounce words in the new way. So...
I went uni of York, so I've at least been close up there.
Oh, cool. Very good. Yeah, York is lovely. My sister lives there now. Just an hour away.
Chris? I think Chris invited me along here. I think he went York as well.
Oh, cool.
Person who invited me and is not. I can't see him here. He told me that he's not turned up yet. Well, I can't see him.
Oh well. He's got time. Oh, thank you all for coming.
Oh, we've got people joining thick and fast
Olga.
now. I'm just going to wait for the incoming people to slow down a bit, or do you want to get started, Liam?
I think we'll probably just get started in just a second. I'm just assisting people who missed the email earlier with all the Zoom details. And then we'll be good to get going, I think.
Nice one. Okie dokie. Huh. Okay.
Okay, so just make sure I can share my screen. Okay, so welcome everybody to May's DevOps Nuts. As always, we are sponsored by Rebel Recruiters, who very quickly this evening helped us out with the Zoom upgrade, given our RSVPs have exceeded the max amount of participants you could have in the standard Zoom meeting. So we've wrapped up that quickly. And for when we are in person, providing pizzas and the venue and so on as well. Also, thank you to stickers. I know you can't get the stickers right now, but you will be able to get those again once we're able to carry on in person. And to JetBrains for providing the license to give away this evening. As always, you can catch Misha, Louise, Pete, Jonathan, and myself on the Agile Engineering podcast. Episode 5 came out yesterday, in fact, and we've gone back to basics with Agile, and we're talking about the Agile Manifesto. And you can catch other episodes on there about things like working as a distributed team, starting to dispel DevOps myths, and so on as well. Another quick note, I mentioned this last month, but just to reiterate, the Global DevOps Bootcamp has moved from the 30th of May to October the 24th. We will be hosting it at MMT, where I work in Uppingham. There's still tickets available for that, but if you wish to get a ticket, you can go to Google, put in Global DevOps Bootcamp and search for MMT Digital, and you should find that. So on to our giveaways. So tonight you can win a year's JetBrains product license. All you need to do is tweet us on Twitter with the hashtag DevOpsNuts. It doesn't matter if you're in the Zoom session, if you're on YouTube, you can all get involved. Of course, if you would like to speak at DevOps Nuts, you can get in touch with us again on Twitter, or you can email us direct at contact@devopsnuts.co.uk. So tonight, we have two fantastic speakers for you. We're going to start with a friend of mine, which is Ross Shonfeld from the University of Nottingham, with his talk on old industries and new ways. And after a short break, we'll be resuming with Gene Kim, who is the author of the Phoenix Project, the Unicorn Project, the DevOps Handbook, and way, way more, with his talk on the Unicorn Project and the 5 ideals. So thank you both very much for coming this evening and taking the time out of your busy schedules to come and talk at DevOps Nuts. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Ross.
Thank you, everyone. I'm just going to put up my presentation. Bear with me.
You okay there, Ross? You got sorted?
Yep. It's just the first time I've ever used PowerPoint, so. Right. Can everyone hear me? Can everyone see opening slide in a sort of teal green color? Excellent. Okay. Good evening, everyone, and good morning, Gene. My name is Ross Shonfeld. Thanks for the introduction, Liam. Thank you for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to come along to this meet. I've been along twice a few times, not enough times in person, but it's great that DevOps Knots can exist in a virtual form. My name's Ross Shonfeld. I am the cloud solution specialist at the University of Nottingham. I've come here today to talk to you about old industries and new ways, and that is my presentation around working in industries that sort of have an IT function but have existed before the computers, and therefore the benefits and the challenges and the impact of working in that sort of place. So I feel it's benefited me, and I find it very interesting, and I'd like to talk about those aspects and see what you guys think. So thank you very much. So when we talk about new ways of working, we often talk about what's going on at Spotify or Facebook or Apple or Google, these modern massive technology leaders, or we'll talk about startups with their spark of innovation, tiny team, no baggage, and incredible agility. However, sometimes we can get the best advantages by working in the more traditional industries that have a lot more to gain from agility and innovation. So I'd like to talk, first of all, a little bit about the advantages and challenges of working in companies that are based in these old industries. So one of the challenges I've found is some of these companies in these old industries can be about as agile as an oil tanker. And if you haven't experienced that, so if you've only worked at very modern agile companies, it can feel like you're pushing against a brick wall, or you're facing sort of constant and insurmountable pushback, and that could be quite dispiriting. This is not what we do here, is another attitude, almost like institutional objections, where it's nothing specific, but a general cultural pushback against what you're trying to change. Anyone can say no. So in my experience, I found that particularly the larger companies in old industries often have decision-making via committee, and willing to sacrifice dynamism for this risk aversion. And so you'll get into a case where they'll only move something forward if everybody's agreeing to it. One person challenges it, and then it goes into a bit of analysis paralysis, death spiral thing. And if it's not broke, don't fix it. So it's where if there's an existing solution and there's often an incredible reticence to change that solution, to upgrade it, to risk what they have, particularly the older and more established businesses and industries that have stood the test of time. However, there are some advantages. So being an economic heavyweight, I've particularly chosen this slide from Rocky VI because like him in that film, he wasn't particularly agile, but he had a lot of punching power. And so it was a case of a lot of these businesses, because they've survived several, maybe 50 or 100 years, or they've survived multiple economic cycles, they have a strong economic backbone, they have strong cash reserves, so they can apply often financial pressure to situations that other companies just can't do. They can often have the power to invest during a recession. So when they have survived these multiple economic cycles, if your project happens to time, as potentially we are in now, with a significant recession or downturn, these older industries are more likely to be involved with, say, for instance, infrastructural projects or more longer term deliverables that can ride out the economic cycle. They can open doors. Often when you're working for a company that has a brand, and that brand is particularly well known, it's well established, it will open doors far more easier. I've worked at companies where I've been given access to very helpfully cloud providers. The people actually developing the solutions that we were looking to use so much more easier than if I had to explain what my business was and why I should be given access. That's a major boost. And what I describe here is kind of pockets of freedom. So if you are in a business that isn't primarily driving towards an IT end goal, then often your IT change can be held, inside the business and maybe not right on the front line of the cash flow, essentially. So I'd like to talk a little bit around the changing in these old businesses around the technology platforms. Often old industries have made substantial investments in legacy technology platforms and be loath to let them go. Some of the reasons include, say for instance, around safety. Often the cost of building a platform with software engineers is actually dwarfed by the cost of gaining approval for a safety-related system. When I was working in the railway industry, gaining approval of the safety case trumped the actual build of the system we were developing. It was that significant. Another one is the legal framework. So a lot of these older businesses and older industries have rather complex legal frameworks, which is how they get paid and how they get and how they fund all the technology. For instance, if you're a German company with a French plane flying with a British engine over the United States, whose data is it anyway? That can be quite a challenge when you're strapping on these new technologies onto what was originally quite an old platform. These situations can be to your advantage though. So often these obstacles put off many competitors, increasing the size of the market relatively when you're successful, and potentially the size of the profit or uptake, depending on how you measure success. Once your solution becomes the de facto solution, those market constraints will still exist, making it harder to displace your technology solution. I suppose a sort of a good example is somebody like Tesla. So they've now the Model 3 is the best-selling car in segment, largely due to being a desirable electric car that is attracting sort of 0 or 1% benefit in kind for company cars. But they're not an old company, but they're operating in an old industry. And so they've had to pass all the NCAP safety tests, the legal framework, and deliver that system. But now either a competitor will have to go through the process they've already gone through, or if you're Mercedes, BMW, Ford, Volkswagen, you now have to contend with the, if you excuse my French, the shit of yesterday, and deal with all your internal combustion engine platforms and deal with all the hangover of that, whilst at the same time trying to tool up for an electronic, for an electric car platform going forward. I had, the reason I've chosen the Raspberry Pi as the backdrop for this particular slide is one time when I was working in the railway industry, we were upgrading a solution that was developed in the 1970s and was released in 1983. So just a little bit younger than I am. And so we proposed a solution around portable components. It was Linux based. It had it was done using Java, a lot of open source like MQ message broker. But we wanted a way to demonstrate the flexibility, and we wanted to be able to communicate what this changing technology platform meant. So what we did was we managed to get the software installed and running on the Raspberry Pi, which had just come out at the time. And for us, that was a key moment in being able to communicate what the technology platform meant. So where we had previously, you could have written a architecture document or shown diagrams about how it's portable and about how it can be used in a variety of applications or hardware. If you want to make the point to someone perhaps who wasn't from a technology background, repositioning it on a commonly known hobbyist platform was our way of doing it then. So I'd like to talk a bit around changing development processes as well in old industries. when I worked in the railway industry, we were in charge of developing a system to replace the established control unit. And there was a number of us from sort of slightly more modern industry backgrounds. So we were experienced in using application lifecycle management tools. And we were coming in and trying to change the way people were working. But we had some experience in Agile, but this existing team that was there had very little experience in Agile. I'd like to say that we created tribes and guilds, and the developers delivered everything in 2-weekly sprints directly to live, but that wouldn't be the case. That was way too much for the railways. But what we did do is we managed to introduce daily stand-ups for the whole team. Now, this may seem like no big deal, and it's obviously very commonplace. But when you have old-fashioned developers who are just like, leave me alone, I know what I'm doing, don't talk to me, and they're used to being left alone for weeks and weeks, this was quite a challenging aspect. But we kept on at it. The sort of relentlessness of saying that we kept having to do it made some real change, and it became a new normal for them. When we actually came to getting the lifecycle management tool in, we did face a lot of resistance from developers who were and business analysts who were used to just using documents. We formed an unlikely ally in the ultra cautious auditors and security team and safety teams that were in place. And so with them, we demonstrated that this was a way to meet this really important safety case. And so they were our allies in ensuring that this way of working changed and got through. So I'd like to talk a little bit about changing people. I hinted at some of it before. One of my rules is to never ascribe to malice what is satisfactorily explained by a mistake, and to always play the ball, not the man. So on the first point, if someone appears to be deliberately obstructive in wanting you to get your change through, it could be that it's just a communications problem, and more often than not, it is. There's definitely a lot of I think potential in assuming positive intent with most people, if not all people, as a way of getting change delivered. And then even if they are being obstructive, it's important to focus on the fact that it's the issue that's the obstruction, not necessarily the person. So with the onus on you, because you're the one who wants to do the change, you can address that issue. Not necessarily split the difference, but it's about letting them have your way, if you see what I mean, convincing them and finding other ways around the problem to get to your eventual goal. A lot of old industries have rather interesting ways of doing quality assurance and testing. In my experience, and this is included up until the last time I saw this was actually only last year. Actually, no, 2018. You have people who use a combination of developer tests and subject matter expert examinations to validate software in place of dedicated testing professionals or proper testing tools. So when I was part of this team developing safety-related systems, we had an issue where we weren't allowed any commercial tools because we didn't have any budget for it, but we did have some development resource. So we wrote our own, developed our own, and we learned a lot more about the system through that way. Now, a lot of situations these days that wouldn't be necessary with a plethora of online tools, but if you find yourself in an old industry or an engineering function, you may find you're developing towards an air gap solution or something that's an embedded technology that doesn't have constant web access. So that may be a way that you have to proceed. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the communication techniques within these old industries. It's very much true that you'll find that standard corporate communications hasn't changed a lot in a lot of situations. The safe option is to slightly vary the shade of corporate blue on your standard PowerPoint presentation and do exactly as what's expected. But if you're trying to make an impact, and if you're trying to show and really get some understanding rather than see those middle management eyes glaze over, then it definitely pays to do something different that someone else hasn't done before. And in this particular case, I suggested that we go for a hand-drawn animation style. Now, at the time I couldn't draw. Now I can draw, but I can't draw quickly, and not to the standard I wanted. So I thought, right, I'll just go onto an online marketplace and get it commissioned and get it done. And I thought, well, how expensive can it be? Turns out about $11. So that worked really well. We got a few iterations done, got it developed in front of management, and it changed the way that they accepted communication. Everybody thought it wouldn't work, and I think you shouldn't be afraid of perhaps having a reputation for trying things that are a little bit unusual, because in the long run, you'll succeed more often than you'll fail, and you'll at least be recognized and known for doing something a bit different, and this is definitely something to your advantage. So it worked pretty well for me, and the consequence of that was I saw actual change in this particular industry. The next person did something with sort of hand-moved Lego figures, and use that to implement a new IT change. So it had in just a really small way opened the door to discussing these things in a new and different way. The other way we had of looking at this was we were sending out manual reports to our management team, and they weren't reading them. So we thought, right, let's do a dashboard. So we went and created a beautiful online dashboard, and we created all these reports in TFS, and they wouldn't read those. So with this challenge, we said, right, okay, what can we do? So we had enough budget left for some whiteboard paint. So the wall we were in, we got the wall painted, and that wall became our update point. Now, at the time, we were all working in one room. It seems a long time ago since we could do that. And because we had that dedicated team space, we got people into the habit of coming to us, it also helped them come to the stand-ups, come to the other meetings, and see the work that was on this wall, and see this was, we were designing it, we were building it, we were drawing it out, we were planning it all on one wall. And so that made it a center for seeing. And so when somebody needed to come and find out what was going on, they came to this wall. Now, obviously you can't do that now because we're all in lockdown, but the spirit of that, trying to reinvent the way that communication is interpreted, is still valid. So if you're doing your stand-ups, can you make it part of a routine where you always look at the same charts at the start of the stand-up? Can you create a structure within that, so that someone who knows your stand-ups and knows your procedures knows when they can come and look and make it open and easy to see? That's what it's all about. It's about lowering those barriers to entry, to understanding where how your change is moving on. So anybody who knows me well knows that I'll probably get a Star Wars reference somewhere into any presentation. This was a much more recent thing where I was trying to change around how some learning was being given. So I'd been asked by my immediate manager to talk about agile roles, and I'd been given the slot straight after lunch, so that everyone had had a nice big free lunch, eaten a load of pasta. They were all nice and sleepy and tired. So I thought, if I just put up bullet points on how this is going to work, everyone's going to zone off. So what I did is I used film clips from to demonstrate the various agile principles, and just did film clip after film clip. And people were that surprised, I suppose, to see that method of instructing after we just had a day of PowerPoint, that we actually got some reactions. It was mostly positive, but everybody reacted, and that was the key thing. Incidentally, if there is a better example, for the minimum viable product than the Death Star out of Return of the Jedi, then I've yet to see it. So, in summary, I think everyone should relish the opportunity to work in incorporating in an old industry of some sort and develop some change in there, and for three very good reasons. Number one, if you may find that you are a big fish in a small pond. If the industry that you're working in isn't pure IT, often you will be the IT guy. Now, this can often be tough if you are the sort of first point of call for all these issues around developing the system. But when you're successful, you will be the expert in that particular business. You'll be able to talk their language as well, which is very important, whether it's engineering language or utilities or finance or anything like that. You'll be able to talk that language. And also you'll have been in on that project from the ground floor. So you'll be the expert that the new techie people will come and talk to about this. The second reason is I think everyone should have experience in delivering change in difficult environments for the benefit of understanding more about people and how they work. Whilst there's a lot you can learn about implementing technology from online courses or from training, changing people and or culture must at least in part be experienced. That's something I've definitely benefited from. And the other thing is, the last thing is, it will leave a lasting legacy. I don't know about you guys, but working in IT, it's often hard to explain to our friends or our family about what it is we do and what makes what we do important. But when trains move or when planes take off or electricity flows or water flows or something moves and there's something real out there you can point to, people can appreciate it and it incorporates us into a relatable world. And that's me. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time. I hope that's given you something to think about in terms of working in an old industry, about how it can be really beneficial. My name's Ross Shonfeld. I'm at Melbourne720 on Twitter. I've got a blog, myfirst.cloud, if you're interested. Thank you very much for your time.
Yay!
So thank you very much, Ross.
Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Ross? Other than how fantastic his desktop background is.
Start with thanks, I guess. I've certainly found, I guess, in my most recent, well, I'm not sure it's the same as obviously going to an old industry, but I've certainly found it quite an adaptation going to. I've been used to, I guess, environments where essentially IT is king. You know, they're software as a service companies. So changing to companies where I'm in a development department that's actually subservient and we're not the kind of the leaders of the company is certainly another interesting experience and perspective.
Oh, thank you. No, that's good.
I have a question.
Oh, go on.
Sorry, thanks. Hi, Ross. Great talk. Some interesting insight there. I'm especially interested in the safety part of things and where blending DevOps with mission critical systems. We've seen the evolution of Sec DevOps, for example. Do you think there might be, and there may be even an existing concept of mission critical DevOps or safety DevOps?
Oh yeah, definitely. So I've used, I suppose you need to think about what you can take from it rather than necessarily take an entire blanket approach. But I suppose there's often somebody whose responsibility in that particular industry will be for safety specifically. So it often becomes a conversation between you and them to be able to work out, for them to gain confidence in that you're not trying to shortcut the process in some way, that you have in an underlying way, you both have the same end goal. You want this system to work. I think the majority of it is just, it's a bit of fear, it's a bit of reluctance to experiment because of the consequences of getting it wrong. This was, so one of these systems was a safety related system. It was involved with moving trains around. That's obviously very safety important. And there's aspects of it that you can take from there. So obviously all the traceability you get from a tool is very important. Being able to show that you can demonstrate your requirements and repeatedly demonstrate those requirements have been met is very important. But I think a lot of them are, I think, because the last place I worked was relatively recently on a safety critical project, and I think they're looking out for and they're eager to find new ways of doing things, and they know they're not going to get fired for doing it the same way as they have done before, which is, I think, is always the reticence. So they know that they can do that and it will cost a fortune, but it can still just work. But there's a lot of people in these industries who have a modern way of thinking and want to do something different. So if you can put a bit of effort in, they are willing to meet you halfway, I think, and try and understand how they can work a different way.
Thanks.
I think, Jean, you had a question for Ross.
Yeah, thank you. Great talk. Can you talk a little bit about your roles at University of Nottingham and the companies where you brought in more modern ways of working, and why you thought senior leadership would welcome and appreciate your contributions?
Cool, thank you. Yes, so I, first of all, at the University of Nottingham, we're starting our journey into cloud. We probably about 3 or 4 years ago, they started at the sort of experimental level of cloud. Let's spin up a few things in Azure and see what happens. Now we're thinking, oh, okay, now we're sort of on the next stage from experimentation, which is kind of creating a more maintainable service. And so now we are moving in that direction. We're building more services out for the students and for the staff to deliver a mixture of technologies. So we're obviously at the moment, home working is very important. So we're delivering a load of technologies around that, but also around accelerating some of our research projects. I've got 3 projects on at the moment who are dealing directly with the fallout from COVID-19. So they're addressing those and using that big compute in that way. And there's a challenge in a sort of an old industry area there, because universities are obviously very old institutions and they are used to working with on-premise infrastructure. So now it's about saying, well, this is a new world. You can have all this compute and work in all these different ways. How can this benefit? So I'm very conscious that I don't want to just take them down the route of understanding and developing technology in a sort of this is something new and shiny, let's go and do something cool, just for the sake of it. I want them to actually realize the benefit and really get some extra value out of it. So if it does help them, then I'm all for it, and we're getting some good progress on that. In terms of the previous industries, I've worked in energy, energy commodities as well, railways, and engineering. And all of those places have got different constraints on, but I believe they're all working and wanting to find ways to innovate more and more. So they're making themselves more open to it because they realize that they want to embrace new and more agile ways of working.
That's great. Oh, we've got a question from YouTube Live. So Mr. Dan Casely has asked, if managers weren't reading reports and weren't visiting dashboards, is it possible that they didn't want or need the information? what was your motivation for getting that info under their nose?
I suppose it's about. I suppose there's a certain self-serving element. You need them to make decisions, and you need to make them aware so that they can make better decisions. In the cases of the projects I was thinking of, there was quite an extreme pressure to be able to hit those deadlines. So they were wanting the information, but they were wanting it in, say, for instance, maybe a Gantt chart format or something like that. And that was trying. It's not that we had a major issue with producing it in that format. You produce it in the format that you need to, but I think it was trying to get at the underlying need. And we often, with these situations, there's an opportunity to move the conversation on and move the way of working on, as well as answering that need. So to incorporate delivering the product, but also delivering your change in way of working.
Cool, thank you.
Cool. So once again, thank you to Ross. Give the best Zoom round of applause you can.
Yeah.
What we'll do is we'll take a quick comfort break for 5 minutes, and then we'll come back with Jean, if that's all right with everybody. Fantastic.
Yep.
Just as a quick reminder, so that'll take us to just after 7:15, actually, in our time. Just as a quick reminder, if you want to take part in the giveaway, all you've got to do is tweet with the hashtag DevOpsNuts, and you could be in with a chance of winning a year's JetBrains license.
Yep, right. We'll see you soon.
Right, so everybody should be able to unmute themselves and talk amongst yourselves as well if you still want to.
I've got a little page 1 of 2 little arrow on the side for the gallery view. I've never had that before.
We went up to 4 just at Nottingham once.
Really?
When you use the breakout rooms and you get people into little groups to talk amongst each other. Some really good features in them.
That's right, Andy. You usually end up you break. That's what the Northampton. You go into breakout rooms and you kind of pray that someone else actually joins you after 2 minutes.
Oh.
The host can keep an eye on who's where, so we usually have Anna busy pulling people into the rooms and getting everyone in the right place.
That's a very cool feature, Louise. I'd like to be able to use that ourselves.
We end up with people playing again. No one wants to be in the first one in the room, so everyone seems to wait 2 minutes to accept the invites. So that you end up waiting.
I think our trick is we give people a task to do. The last Women in Tech, we had the quiz, so people wanted to go and start answering the questions quickly.
That's a good idea. Yeah, some kind of motivation to be the first one in.
Good shout.
Yeah.
If you go down and hit the little up arrow next to your video icon in the bottom left-hand corner and go to video settings, you scroll right to the bottom of the list of video settings. There's a tick box for display up to 49 participants in the gallery view.
Oh, cool. Thanks, Pete.
3 more people.
That's how that
my
works.
graphics card isn't up to that, unfortunately.
Yeah, my CPU on my computer only supports 25 participants per screen in gallery view.
Oh, that sucks.
Really need a better computer.
Yeah.
Oh, kind of sad.
One of my overriding memories of you, Misha, is you carrying an immensely heavy laptop around on your back, up and down the stairs to .NET Knots.
Yeah, like a turtle up 4 flights of stairs. Those steps were ridiculously large. I mean, yeah, significant, but it was a good workout.
I see we've got Alan in the list of people down there, actually, so I'm guessing that he still goes up and down those steps every now and again.
Oh, poor thing. There is a lift, which is obviously...
Not right now. Well, exactly. As Alan says, it's all at home now, obviously.
Mm.
The question is, to see 50 people, then how big of a screen do you need?
Well, I'm on a ultra-wide monitor at the moment, and there is just about everybody on there, I think. And that's a 35-inch 21:9.
I wonder if I can go over several screens. I made the mistake of going for the 4 monitor setup rather than a big monitor.
I've taken a step back from that and gone for the big one because I got so tired of trying to fit them all on one desk.
That's fair.
I actually, I kid you not, my 4 monitors actually started sinking into my desk because it wasn't strong enough and it started caving towards me.
I'm struggling to find a monitor arm that'll take this because it's quite heavy. It's almost like back to having a massive CRT on your desk.
Surely the answer to that is usually just a pile of books. That's the ultimate monitor arm, isn't it?
Yeah, the yellow pages used to be the thing for that on the telephone book.
It's too thin these days, though, Pete.
You're right.
There's not enough people in the yellow pages now.
No, that little boy can no longer stand on it and kiss that.
Might be showing your age there a bit, Pete.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, well, obviously. Like the grey
Don't be sorry.
Don't
be sorry.
Are you still there?
I am, yeah. Hi.
How did you get on with the Raspberry Pi project? I didn't ask in the questions because it's not really a DevOps question, that.
Yeah, no worries. So the one I talked about in the talk. Yeah, it went really well. I got invited to the CEO's sort of heads of important meeting thing to talk about it. Actually, it was really quite exciting. And this is the thing. It was, it was just a part of the system that took the information off the railway and showed it. But because it was such a small component, we could just sideload it onto a Raspberry Pi, and you know, it wasn't the greatest ever piece of technical deployment ever done in the history of man or anything, but it sort of got through to people. It's something you could hold up and say, look, the thing we built is on there, and it was a thing.
How did you deploy it?
That's a good question. It's a while ago now.
Copy and paste.
Yeah.
Back then.
Yeah.
Samba. FTP.
Yeah. I think it was FTP. Yeah. I think we just FTP'd it across.
Yeah, it was only proof of concept, though. I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You wouldn't be allowed to put that on the railway.
I did hear an interesting thing about somebody that was working on railway lines and monitoring where they've got these really expensive boxes dotted along the railway line, but in places that are like really hard to get to. And there are thousands of pounds each, these things, and they were just measuring for when there was breaks in continuity and stuff like that, I think. And they replaced it with something akin to a Raspberry Pi for, you know, a fraction of the cost. And it's right, it's definitely impacting. It's having a great effect in that area.
Well, there was a time in, and you remember, there was a time in the 90s where everybody wanted to just go and sell mobile phones. And all the people in London who were making lots of money were going to be plumbers because nobody wanted to do that particular piece of work. And there were all these guys selling mobile phones and getting paid a pittance, and these guys who were plumbers being paid a fortune. And I suppose the moral of that story is sometimes that if you end up in whatever job you're doing, going somewhere that somebody doesn't want to go, under somebody's sink, maybe into a metal box on the railway in the north of England in the winter, that it can actually be quite a good, lucrative career, and you can do really well out of it. Yeah.
That's what a Cobalt programmer is now, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. I forget
out for them in the US, aren't they?
Yeah, something happened, didn't it? They needed them for something. I forget what it was. But...
Right, guys. Well, hopefully we're all back at our seats because I'm sure you all had really far to go. And I would like to give a huge DevOps Knots welcome to Mr. Gene Kim.
I can't stop myself.
Oh, awesome, Liam and team. Thank you. Let's see here. So I'm going to try to share my screen. I always have a tinge of fear when I do this. All right, let's see. Do I share desktop and then go into presenter view? I rehearse this. All right. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? All right. All right. Hey, thank you. So what? Let's see here. So how to set this up. So I've spent the last 21 years studying high-performing technology organizations, and that's a journey that started for me back when I was a CTO and founder of a company called Tripwire in the information security and compliance space. And so these high performers were specifically those organizations that had the best project due date performance and development, the best operational stability and reliability in ops, and also the best posture, security, and compliance. And so the goal was always to understand how did these amazing organizations make their good to great transformation so that we could understand how other organizations could replicate their amazing outcomes. And so, as you can imagine, in a 20-year journey like that, there were many surprises. But by far, the big surprise was how it took me into the middle of the DevOps movement, which I think is urgent and important. The last time that any organization has been transformed to the extent that our organizations are being disrupted today was likely manufacturing when it was revolutionized through the application of the lean principles. And so that's exactly what I think DevOps is. You take those same lean principles, apply them to the technology value stream that we work in every day, and you end up with these emergent patterns that allow organizations to do tens, hundreds, or even hundreds of thousands of deployments per day while preserving world-class reliability, security, and stability. That's something I simply did not think was possible, certainly 10 years ago. So one of the great delights in that journey was co-authoring a book called The Phoenix Project. And it's been so amazing to see that book being used as almost a banner for the DevOps community to get other people on board. And so I can't overstate just how much I've learned since then. And so what I'd like to share today is what I've learned in the writing of the Unicorn Project, which came out late last year. But before I do, what I'd like to do is actually share with you my definition of DevOps, which I've increasingly been forced to do. And this is what the definition came out of the DevOps handbook. Specifically, it's the architectural practices, technical practices, and cultural norms that enable us to increase our ability to deliver applications and services quickly and safely, which enables us to rapidly experiment and innovate, enables us to quickly deliver value to our customers in the quickest possible way, while ensuring security, reliability, and stability. And so why do we care about all of that? It's so that we can win in the marketplace. So I like that definition because it actually doesn't say what DevOps is. Instead, it describes the outcomes that we aspire to. But there is a definition that I like even more, and it didn't come from me. It comes from John Smart, who for many years led the Better Ways of Working at Barclays, founded in the year 1634, which predates the invention of paper cash. And his definition is simply this: better value, sooner, safer, happier. And so I love it just because it's one, shorter, two, I would say it is as accurate as a definition that I gave. And it's just so wonderfully pithy. And really, who would argue that we want less value that takes longer and more dangerously and with less happiness? So I think it is just a fantastic definition. And so over the years, we wrote the DevOps Handbook, which is meant to be the nonfiction companion guide to the Phoenix Project, the Accelerate book with Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble. And then there's some problems that still remained. These are the things that seem very important to me that I want to explore further. One is the absence of all of the invisible structures required to enable developers to be truly productive. Two is that there's this other problem that seems almost orthogonal to the problem that DevOps solves. So the DevOps community rightly pointed out that it was so hard to get code to where it needed to go, which is in production, so that customers get value, and that would take weeks, months, or quarters to actually get things in production. So would you believe that there's this almost bigger problem that exists around data? So data often resides in systems of records, in data warehouses, where it takes weeks, months, or quarters to get it to where it needs to go, which is in the hands of people to help make decisions. And often when you actually do get data there, right, it actually sometimes breaks every schema in the entire enterprise. And so just to calibrate the size of this problem, somewhere between a third and a half of employees in large complex organizations use data or manipulate data as part of their daily work. So arguably it could be a problem even bigger than DevOps. Often there's strong opposition to support new ways of working and ambiguity from what we actually need from leaders to support a transformation like DevOps. And so these are what seem very important to me, and they're explored in the Unicorn Project. And so in the Phoenix Project, we had the 3 ways, which are really intended to be the principles of which you can derive all of the observed DevOps patterns from. And the Unicorn Project uses a construct of the 5 ideals, which are just meant to frame kind of these things I think are very important. So in this presentation, what I'll do is I'll talk about each one of these of the 5 ideals and describe what ideal looks like and what not ideal looks like. So the first ideal is locality and simplicity. The second is focus, flow, and joy. The third ideal is improvement of daily work. The fourth is psychological safety. And the fifth is customer focus. So the Unicorn Project takes place in the same timeline as the Phoenix Project. Both happen, quote, in the present day. And whereas the Phoenix Project was told from the perspective of ops leadership, the Unicorn Project is told through the eyes of a senior developer. And so before I go into the 5 ideals, I want to share with you maybe the biggest aha moment, which is really the work that I did with Dr. Nicole Forsgren and Jez Humble in the State of DevOps report. So for 6 years, we benchmarked over 36,000 respondents, really trying to understand what does high performance look like and what are the cultural norms and architectural practices and technical practices that enable and predict performance. And the punchline really is that the business value of DevOps is even higher than we thought. So for 6 years, the results have been very decisive. We know that high performers massively outperform their high performing peers. So we know that they're deploying multiple times a day versus monthly or quarterly. So that's 2 orders of magnitude difference between high and low. More importantly, when they do a deployment, they can execute that deployment in 1 hour or less. In other words, how long does it take them to go from code committed into version control, through integration, through testing, through deployment, so that customer is actually getting value. And that's 100 times faster than their peers. When they do a deployment, they are 7 times more likely to have it succeed without causing a 7-1 outage, a service impairment, a security breach, or a compliance failure. And when something goes wrong, they can fix it in 1 hour or less. In other words, the mean time to restore service is 1 hour or less. So that's 3 orders of magnitude faster than their peers. And so now these results are very consistent year over year. And so we know that high performers, they have other dimensions of quality because they spend, they integrate security objectives into every stage of daily work and everyone's daily work. They spend 1/2 the amount of time remediating security issues. They're spending less time on unplanned work, allowing them to deploy nearly 1/3 more time on planned work. But in 2018, we started looking at not just IT performance or software delivery performance, but also organizational performance. And that was amazing because we found that those same high performers are twice as likely to exceed profitability, market share, and productivity goals for not-for-profits, whether it's a government agency, military service, and not-for-profit, the same multiple of performance. They're twice as likely to achieve organizational and mission goals, regardless of how they defined it, whether it was measured by customer satisfaction, quantity, or quality. And so really the takeaway should be this: if mission achievement requires technology, the use of DevOps principles and patterns help with the achievement of those goals. Other markers of organizational performance: employees in high performers are twice as likely to exceed to recommend their organizations as a great place to work, as measured by the Employee Net Promoter Score. So this is a proxy measure for engagement, to what extent people are able to get pride in what they do, and of employee satisfaction. And that's something that every senior leader does care about, or should. And so to me, sort of beyond the numbers, what this helps paint for me is really what the opposite of technical debt is. It really is, to what extent can we safely, quickly, reliably, securely achieve all the goals, dreams, and aspirations of the organizations that we serve. So the first ideal I mentioned is locality and simplicity. And so concretely in the Unicorn Project, one of my favorite quotes in the review process came from Dr. McKirsten, who wrote the book Project to Product, CEO of TaskTop. He said, "You couldn't design a worse architecture for an engineer to get things done than what is described in the Unicorn Project. The problem is I see these architectures all the time." And so for me, the aha moment came from this amazing story of the birth and death of a technology called Sprouter at Etsy. And so that's the famous e-commerce site in the United States that went public 3 years ago. And so this is essentially a story of how teams of engineers work together to create value for customers. So in the bad old days in 2008, their big problem was that in order to ship a feature to customers, 2 teams would have to work together to create value. The devs would work in the front end inside of, in their case, PHP, and then the back end, DBAs would work in the back end. In their case, it was stored procedures inside of Postgres. And so the fact that these teams had to, there were two components means that, these teams had to communicate and coordinate and schedule together, coordinate, prioritize, right, in order to provide value for customers. And so the goal was to enable these teams to work independently. And so that's why they created something called Sprouter. The idea was these teams would work independently and then meet in the middle inside of Sprouter. So Sprouter is short for Stored Procedure Router. And as Ian Malpass, a senior engineer at Etsy, said, this required a degree of synchronization and coordination that was rarely achieved, to the extent that almost every deployment became a mini outage. And if you're doing 30 to 50 to 80 deployments per day, right, this is a real problem. What I find so interesting here is that as you go from 2 teams to 3 teams, Conway's Law would predict that, that amount of communication coordination would drive up deployment lead times and would drive down quality outcomes. And that's what we saw. So their goal, as part of the great rebirth of engineering culture at Etsy, was to kill Sprouter. And what their observation was that whatever part of the property, they eliminated Sprouter now through the use of ORM, so object relational models, where developers could implement the entirety of the feature without any dependencies on the DBA team. Suddenly, code deployment lead times went way down and the quality of the outcomes went way up. And so Conway's Law would predict this as well. As we go from 3 teams that have to communicate, coordinate, deconflict, prioritize, synchronize, and so forth, to 1 team that has no need to coordinate whatsoever, right? Suddenly all those problems go away. And so the big lesson for me is that the lesson that is not enough to move org charts, the boxes around on an org chart. Instead, we must also have a software architecture that is congruent to that to enable teams to be able to work independently. And so here's what I find so amazing is that all these problems were evident with only 3 teams having to work together. But in most large, complex organizations, it's not 3 teams, it's scores of teams. As measured by what? So when we open up a ticket on the left and we plot all the steps required to get into production, meaning we have to get environments, make sure they're configured properly, they have the right mount points, user accounts, we have to make middleware changes, firewall changes, we get security reviews, maybe even enterprise architecture review boards. It doesn't take a lot to go wrong before we're looking at code deployment lead times measured in weeks, months, or even quarters. And so this is an architecture that is supremely unsuited for allowing teams to be able to work independently. No one can work independently. And so this is one of the big surprises for me in the State of DevOps report. In 2017, we found that architecture was actually one of the top predictors of performance, as measured by what? To what extent can teams make large-scale changes to their parts of the system without permission from anyone outside the team? To what extent can they complete their work without a lot of fine-grained communication and coordination with people outside their team? To what extent can they deploy and release their service on demand, independent of other services it may depend upon? This is one of my favorites. To what extent can they do testing on demand without the use of a scarce integrated test environment, of which there are never enough? No one ever cleans them up, which actually undermines the testing objectives. And you always have to wait in line. And so if all those things are true, then chances are you can actually do deployments during normal business hours with negligible downtime. And so just to maybe calibrate why this is so surprising to me, back when I was at Tripwire, I was trained that it was always safe to ignore architects, especially chief architects, because everyone knew that they lived in the ivory tower and they would only come out once a year. They would publish a Visio diagram and a PowerPoint deck that they would email to everybody, and then they would go back into their ivory tower, never to be seen again for another year. And so if that were ever true, right, that was just a polite way of saying they didn't really impact how daily work was performed. And yet what these findings show is that architecture, almost nothing impacts the daily work of developers more than architecture. So architecture really matters. So the first ideal, maybe an inspirational measure, is the bus factor. In the Phoenix project, the bus factor is measured as how many people need to be hit by a bus before the project, service, or organization is in grave jeopardy. In the Phoenix project, the bus factor was 1 because it was Brent, right? No outage could be fixed without Brent. No major piece of work could get done without Brent. And so ideally, we want a bus factor that is much larger than that so that we can have resilient teams and resilient organizations. So I think the corresponding measure for the first ideal is the lunch factor. To get anything major that you need to get done, how many people do you need to take out to lunch? Is it the Amazonian ideal of the 2-pizza team? Or do you need to feed everybody in the building? Do you need to schedule lunch with 43 different people, as Ron mentioned in the last talk, right? If everyone can say no, you have to do extraordinary things to get everybody on board. And so in complex deployments, you might have to feed 100, 200 people, right? And so obviously you want a lunch factor much lower than that. So ideal is that when you want to implement a feature, you can change one file, one module, one namespace, one application, one container, and do everything you need there. In the not ideal, you have to make changes in all the files, all the modules, all the applications, all the containers, and so forth, right? Which dries up the lunch factor. In the ideal, changes can be implemented in isolation and also tested in isolation from all the other components, which is that notion of composability. Not ideal is that the only way that we can get any assurance that our change is actually going to work in production as designed is that it needs to be present along with every other component, right? Which drives us towards the need for these very scarce and brittle integrated test environments. Ideal is that every team has not only expertise and capability, but also the authority to do what our customers need or ask for. Not ideal is that in order to do what the customer wants, we have to escalate every decision up 2 levels, over 2, and then down 2. So visually depicted, to get permission, we have to go up 2, over 2, and then down 2. And so this is what my friend calls the square. And he said, actually, this is the ideal. This is actually the good optimistic case. In most cases, we actually have to do the return path in order for 2 teams, for 2 engineers to actually work together to do what the customer wants. I will say that one of the best books I've read in the last decade that describes this ideal is Team of Teams by General Stanley McChrystal. It is an amazing story about the Joint Special Forces Task Force that was battling a far smaller, far more nimble adversary in Iraq in 2004. And their mission was to protect the citizenry in Iraq. And it is just an amazing story of where you had all these elite teams, whether it was the U.S. Navy SEALs or the U.S. Army Rangers or Delta Force that could not work together. In fact, they called the team or the squad the boundary of which everyone else sucked, right? And then you throw in the intelligence agencies, right? They're on an entirely lower tier altogether. So how do you create the structure and the dynamics so that they can actually work together towards a common objective? And it was just this remarkable story that I think anyone in technology this book will resonate with them as well. So in the first ideal, that's all about locality and simplicity. And ideal number 2 is really what I think the outcomes are, which is that it enables developers to focus and it creates flow and enables joy. And so in the Unicorn Project, our protagonist, our hero, Maxine, is unfairly blamed for a payroll outage, and she is exiled to the dreaded Phoenix Project. And despite all of her experience and skills, I view her as like Tom Hanks' character in the movie Cast Away, where he's stranded on a desert island, unable to do anything by herself, trapped in a frozen tundra of technical debt, which saps all the joy from the work that she normally loves. And so, so much of this was informed by my journey going back through development. So for 20 years, I self-identified primarily as an ops person. And this is despite being formally trained as a developer. I got my graduate degree in compiler design and high-speed networking. And, so much of what I gravitated towards was operations. And I think the reason is that it was my observation that it was ops where all the saves were made. It was ops who saved us from terrible developers who didn't care about quality and wrecked everything in production. It was ops who was actually doing the hard work to secure our data and protect it from the bad people, right? Because it certainly wasn't security. And yet something really changed after learning Clojure, which is this functional programming language. It's a Lisp. It has a huge preference for immutability. What I learned was that development is so fun and you can do so many things with so little effort these days. And what I find so exciting about it is that not only has it reintroduced the joy of coding back into my daily life, that things like immutability are showing up outside of development as well. So the famous French philosopher Claude Lévi-Strauss, he would say of certain tools, is it a good tool to think with? And I think things like immutability are definitely better tools to think with. And so it was pioneered certainly in programming languages. But what is amazing is that it's showing up in infrastructure and operations as well. So if you look at Docker, it is fundamentally immutable, right? Once you create a container, you can't really change it. You can change it inside the container, right? But it's not going to persist. To really make a lasting change, you have to make a new one. Kubernetes takes that same concept, but applies it not just at the component level, but at the system of systems level. Like whenever you see someone using Apache Kafka, someone has a very strong notion of an immutable data model, and version control is fundamentally immutable. And so this is why people you get yelled at if you rewrite the commit history, right? Is because that is actually meant to be a immutable record of changes made to a repository. And so in the ideal, right, when you have better tools to build things and better ways of thinking, your time and energy is focused on solving the business problem at hand, and you're having fun. Not ideal is that all your time is spent solving problems that you don't even want to solve, like writing and trying to write correct YAML files, or escaping spaces and file names inside of make files, and writing bash scripts. And so the biggest surprise to me in this rediscovery of development is that there are a whole bunch of things that I used to enjoy 10, 20 years ago that I detest now. For example, everything outside of my application, I don't want to be touching. I don't want to connect anything to anything else, especially databases, because it always takes me a week. Updating dependencies, because every time I update dependencies, especially JavaScript, everything breaks. Secrets management. I'm the person who checks in secrets into the repository, causing all sorts of problems for everybody. Bash, YAML, patching, building Kubernetes deployment files. And I'm the person who can't figure out why my cloud costs are so high. 1 second. So I think this is not to diminish these things. These are absolutely important. In fact, these are as important as the functional requirements of the features we're building. But I just don't want to do it anymore. And so this is why I love having my best friends be operations and infrastructure and security people, right? Because they can help me with this. So I'll make the claim that there's never been a better time to be a developer because all of these things, whether it's operational concerns, infrastructure concerns, and security, can now be embedded into our platforms. We don't want this expertise in people's heads. We want them in the platform so we can inherit the best known understanding of how to take their knowledge and deploy code safely, securely, reliably, and quickly into production. Self-service, on demand, with immediacy and fast feedback, which allows us to have a sense of focus and flow and even joy in our work. And so many things can now be done this way, whether it's monitoring, deployment, environment creation, security scans. And what a great time to be developers. And I will also make the claim that it's never been a better time to be in infrastructure and operations. That the best days of infrastructure and ops are not behind us, but certainly are ahead of us. And I would say the same thing exists and are present in security and QA as well. One of the best treatments of this concept comes from Dr. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote this amazing book called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. And he describes what it feels like when we're doing the work that we truly love, that we lose track of time and maybe even sense of self. And so that is the almost transcendental experience we have when we love the work we do and we derive enjoyment from it. And so I often keep screenshots of Google searches where I'm not in the state of flow, whether I'm Googling Java date time instances or Googling how to write Kubernetes deployment YAML files. And this is not to say that they're not important. It's just that I promise you, I did not wake up that morning aspiring to figure out how date and time work in Java. I appreciate date and time, and I appreciate time, but that is not, I can promise you that is not the problem I woke up to solve in the morning. So before I go to the next one, I want to share another big aha moment for me, and that is really the notion of the code deployment lead time. And so in our research, we always measure lead time on how quickly can we go from code committed into version control, through integration, through testing, through deployment, so that customers are actually getting value. And you might ask, why do we start the lead time clock there? Why don't we start it when the idea is first conceived, so at the point of ideation? Or why don't we start it at when when developers accept the work to go into implementation. And so those are absolutely valid lead time measures. But the reason we choose code committed to start the clock is that it is a dividing line between two very different parts of the value stream. So in everything before code committed is product design and development. So this is a fundamentally experimental mode of working, right? This is hypothesis-driven development, discovering kind of the UX modalities, this design thinking. It's often we're doing work that's never been done before, right? And the unit of a measure for how long the work takes is not measured in minutes or hours. It's usually days, weeks, months, or sometimes even quarters. And that's often the nature of design and development work. However, everything to the right of code committed into version control is product delivery. In other words, build, test, and deploy. And this, we want the exact opposite characteristics. We want build, test, and deploy to not only happen the same time every time, but we want it to happen quickly and reliably, the same way every time, ideally automated. And ideally, we want it to be happening all the time, every time that we commit code. And so with low variability. And so what's amazing is that the code deployment lead time simultaneously predicts the effectiveness of product build, test, and deploy, but also predicts how quickly are we giving developers feedback on their work. In other words, if I create an error and I check into version control, if the first opportunity of which I can discover the error is 9 months later when I'm doing integration testing, the link between cause and effect is basically gone, right? The mean time to find the error is long. We can't figure out what went wrong. Is it my problem or something that my 100 other developer friends did? And so worse, the mean time to fix is much longer. And even on top of that, I might make the same mistake for 9 months in a row, right? So compounding the number of problems that you're going to find and have to fix. So in the ideal, what we want is that the instant I check in my error, I should be able to discover the problem within minutes after integrated the automated testing kicks in, right? And so not only can I find the issue faster, I can fix the issue faster, and I've learned something. And we want to learn not only from our mistakes, but from our customers. The code deployment lead time gates how quickly and how many experiments we can do. So ideally, we're learning from A/B testing or specific design experiments. And so our goal is to out-learn and out-experiment the competition. So code deployment looks like a very tactical metric. And yet I do believe that it is one of the most strategic measurements of any technology for any technology organization. So I talked a lot about metrics. I talked a lot about architectural practices and some technical practices and cultural norms. And it turns out you can predict almost all of them by just asking one question. And the question is this: on a scale of 1 to 7, to what degree do we fear doing deployments? 1 is we have no fear at all. We do them all the time. 1 just happened. And 7 is we have existential fear of doing deployments. In other words, if we could wave a magic wand, the next deployment we do is never. So we are out of the deployment business. And so it just shows how good the brain is at associating fear with problematic activities. So I think that's just a great way to kind of assess kind of the health of a specific application or service, is just by asking this one question. So ideal is when you can implement and test features on your laptop and learn whether it will work in seconds in production. Not ideal is that the only way we can determine whether something will work in production is by waiting minutes, hours, days, weeks, months, or even quarters, which is what happens often when you have to be tightly coupled to an integrated test environment. Ideal is we're doing something like trunk-based development, where we may be working in a feature branch, but we're at least merging into production, once a day. Not ideal is we're not doing that. And then consequently, we spend, every time we have to do a code merge, it takes 5 days with 50 people trapped in conference rooms trying to figure out why nothing works. Here's a little picture that to remind myself of this. So I work in a lot of projects by myself. And what I found is that I often work in feature branches, and I can often find myself where I cannot merge with myself. So if you can't even merge with yourself, right? To me, it shows that people being able to merge with 100 other people, is that notion that you can do that reliably and quickly is really an illusion, right? No one can. So first ideal is locality and simplicity. Second ideal is focus, flow, and joy. And the third ideal is improvement of daily work. And so in the Unicorn Project, Maxine ponders, how did the Phoenix Project get to the terrible state that it's in? And her conclusion, with some encouragement from her mentor, Eric, is that it comes from ignoring technical debt and diminishing or totally negating the value of improvement of daily work. So not ideal is twatty. In other words, the way we've always done it. Ideal is make tomorrow better than today. And so this is principle number 2 from Google SRE, Site Reliability Engineering. And I just find that such a wonderful, wonderful phrase. So the great example of not ideal is the General Motors Fremont plant. For decades, this was the worst performing automotive plant, not just in North America, but probably around the globe. And there were so many instances because there were no effective procedures to detect problems during the assembly process, nor were there explicit procedures on what to do when problems were found. There were instances of engines being put in backwards, cars missing steering wheels or tires, cars even having to be towed off the assembly line because they wouldn't start. So this is clearly not ideal. What do we want instead? And really what we want is a system where we're putting in as much feedback as possible in as many areas of the system as possible, sooner, faster, and cheaper, where we can create as much clarity between cause and effect. And the reason we do this is that we can invalidate our own assumptions, the system as not as designed, but as in real life. And so the more we do that, the more we learn. The more we learn, it allows us to outlearn the competition. And that's a concept you'll find at the core of any learning organization. So I took a course in 2011 at the University of Michigan for a week, and it was amazing. As part of the training, you actually go out on the plant floor, and you can see that plants modeled after the Toyota production system have on top of every work center a cord that everyone is trained to pull when something goes wrong. So if I create a defective part, I pull the cord. If I get a defective part from someone else, I pull the cord. If I have no parts to work on, I pull the cord. And I even pull the cord. I never noticed this. This is actually a picture from a Toyota plant in the UK. Oh, that's awesome. And this is actually in a Time magazine, which is a publication that used to be in the US, still in the US. At any rate, so if I pull the cord, even if the work takes longer than documented, if it was supposed to take 55 seconds and it took a minute 20, I pull the cord. So what is amazing is that this cord is pulled in a typical Toyota plant. Okay, just think, how many times is the andon cord pulled in a typical Toyota plant per day? So just order of magnitude. And so the answer is 3,500 times per day. And so I don't know about you, but my first reaction was, these people are idiots. These people have no idea what they're doing, because it seems to me that by pulling the cord, they're actually taking a local disturbance and magnifying it to become a global disturbance. And so, but because when you pull the cord, the entire assembly line stops. And so the question becomes, why would they do something so disruptive so frequently? And there's 2 answers that they give that I find so incredible. One is, essentially what they're saying is that if we don't put in a systemic fix then and there, technical debt will accrue downstream, where it will become much more expensive and maybe even impossible to fix. So that, I believe, is absolutely true. The second reason they give is in some ways far more profound to me. And they'll say that we do this because if we don't put in a systemic fix then and there, we're going to have the same problem 55 seconds later. And so that's the notion of the daily workaround. And so daily workarounds exist in our work as well. But because our work takes more than 55 seconds to do, daily workarounds aren't as visible, but they are absolutely as destructive. And so really the learning for me is that greatness is never free. All right, we have to pay down technical debt. We have to improve daily work. And so one of the most gratifying things I got to do in the last couple of years is really come up with a visual depiction of where technical debt comes from and why it's important. Someone wise said to me about 15, 20 years ago, when dealing with executives, stick with small numbers and primary colors. And what I found in my journey is that at a certain level of seniority, that is not sufficient. We have to stick with something even simpler, which is up and down. So I'm going to tell you the story of where technical debt comes from using only up and down arrows. So we've all been in situations where we have to push features into market, right? Sometimes it's to be in market first, or sometimes it's because we're not first to market and we just have to get in the game, or we're the last people to market. And so when we do that, that's often where we build up technical debt and build up risks, because we are cutting corners to get those features to market. And when we do that, this is what causes quality to go down and drives defects up. And so that's not the end of the story, right? Because over time, what we find is that feature velocity goes down, and we can spend almost all our time on defects, right? Where we're spending more than 100% of our time just dealing with things broken in the code or in the environments. And so this is when site reliability tanks. This is when we go slower and slower. Customers leave, morale plunges, and engineers leave because everything is just so freaking hard. Things that were easy 3 years ago now seems impossible. And so thanks to the magic of Twitter, a friend of mine tweeted this at me, John Cutler from the product space. He said, yes, that's exactly what I've seen happen. In 2015, a certain reference feature would take 15 to 30 days. 3 years later, it takes 10 times longer. And so I think this is just magnificent evidence that if you felt that things are harder than it were before, you're not imagining it. It is absolutely a fact that these things happen. One of the second book I'll mention that is one of the best books I've read in the last decade is this book by Risto Salasma. He's the chairman of Nokia. It's a book called Transforming Nokia. And your first reaction might be, what can you possibly learn from someone who joined the board in 2008 of Nokia and oversaw the decimation of 93% of their market cap? And yet it is an amazing book. He has this unflinching assessment of his own effectiveness, having to find working with a very domineering board chairman. He took over the company in 2009. But the best scene was when he describes learning in 2010 from the VP of strategy that the Symbian OS build times were 48 hours. So this is what all their hopes, dreams, and aspirations rested upon. And he said it felt like being hit in the head with a sledgehammer, because he knew that if it took 2 days for a developer to know whether the change worked or would have to be redone, then there was a fundamental flaw in their architecture that doomed near-term profitability and long-term viability. We could have had 20 times as many developers and it wouldn't have made them go any faster. And so this actually is what drove their change to Windows Mobile, which wasn't actually so good for them either. They actually said that it actually dragged them into the grave, but it was actually a better bet than staying on the Symbian OS. And so, I think in a just world, any board director should be able to recognize how fatal technical debt is. And this has happened to every tech giant, whether it's eBay, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, Twitter, LinkedIn, Etsy. All of these companies were at one point at the verge of going out of business because of technical debt. And all these companies survived because they all did something like what Bill Gates did in 2002. So after the summer of worms, where this is when SQL Slammer and Nimda and Code Red were basically threatening the viability of Microsoft, Bill Gates put out a memo, a famous memo called the Trustworthy Computing Memo, and essentially describes the security stand down, where almost every product across Microsoft stopped working on features. And there's a wonderful phrase Bill Gates talked about, which is that if any developer has to choose between adding a feature or resolving a security issue, you always must choose security, right? Because it is that important. And that is what every company has done who has survived this crisis. They bring down features to zero, right? To pay down technical debt so they can improve quality, drive down defects, not maybe to zero, but something that we can actually sustain over time. And then this is what allows us to invest in dev productivity so that we can go faster than ever. And this not comes from just CEOs, it comes from product management as well. This is Marty Kagan, who wrote one of the books that's really heralded in the UX and product community. He wrote this book called Inspired, How to Create Products That Customers Love. And one of the key pieces of advice that he gives is that product owners, and he's trained generations of product owners, this is that they should take 20% of engineering cycles off the table. They're not there for other product owners. They're there for engineers to spend however they best see fit to fix problematic areas of code, fix issues in the environment, automate, re-architect, whatever it takes to make sure that we never get into a situation where we cannot ship features. And he says that if you don't pay this 20% tax, your inevitable outcome is that you will have to pay 100% tax, paying down technical debt. So the third ideal is that, like the tech giants, we're investing 3 to 5% of our dev cycles just improving dev productivity. Google famously has a group of 1,500 developers just working on dev productivity. It's over $1 billion US spend annually. Microsoft has likely over 3,000 to 5,000 developers working on dev productivity. Not ideal is that the only people we put on dev productivity are summer interns and the developers who are not good enough to work on features. Just as a little point of amusement, in the tech giants, the best developers are put on dev productivity. These are often people with PhDs, with focus areas like static code analysis. The Google Blaze build system has generated many PhD papers. The next best developers are put on backend APIs, and the most junior developers are put on features. Whereas in most organizations, the best developers are put on features or the app because people can see it. The next best developers are put on system of record and backend APIs, and then the most junior people are put on build systems and dev productivity, right? So, we want that turned inverted completely. And wonderful kind of karmic story. 25 years, 30 years after that famous Bill Gates memo, Satya Nadella 3 years ago in a town hall said, if a developer ever has to choose between a feature or dev productivity, work on dev productivity, right? Because he is now using compounding interest in his favor versus and technical debt where it is working to our grave detriment. Not ideal. No one cares if someone breaks the tests or checks some code that breaks our tests. Ideal, whenever someone breaks the build or our tests, fixing that becomes the most important work of the moment. We don't have to stop everyone's work, but if that person needs help, I drop whatever I'm doing to help that person because we know that we have to get back into a green state. Not ideal. When someone needs a peer review, that person has to wait days or weeks before they can get their +1 or +2, right? From that most senior person who's very, very busy. Ideal is that whenever I need a peer review, I'll drop whatever I am doing to help that person because we know that the longer that person has to wait to get into production, the worse the outcomes. And tomorrow it might be the other way around. I might need that peer review and that person will help me. So the golden rule. I'll just share this one. This was a great talk that was given at DevOps Enterprise. You would think the and-on code would have no place in knowledge work and development. And I believe that until last year when someone showed me an experiment where someone actually created an and-on code for development. And the astonishing punchline is the red line shows the number of and-on chord polls. The more and-on chord polls they had per day, the quicker the cycle time to get features into the hands of customers. And so when and-on chord polls went down, the lead time and cycle time went up. And so there's a great talk just on this. It's not, I wouldn't call this proven like in the Accelerate book, but it just shows how wide open the field is in the work that we're doing. So the first ideal is locality and simplicity. The second ideal is focus, flow, and joy. The third ideal is improvement of daily work. And the fourth ideal is psychological safety. So in the Unicorn Project, Maxime ponders, why is it so difficult for anyone in the Phoenix Project to say what they really think, to do the right thing? Why are these poor decisions made over and over again? Why is it so difficult to correct or improve the outcomes even after everyone knows that we made the wrong call? And so this is something I wanted to explore very much in the Unicorn Project. And so much of this is referred to in the Accelerate and State of DevOps work. Let me reorient myself. And so this is the Westrom organizational typology model that shows up in the State of DevOps report and Accelerate. And so what Dr. Ron Westrom discovered over 25 years ago is that in healthcare organizations, the organizations with the best patient outcomes, one of the top predictors or the thing that correlated most with it is culture. So in the organizations with the worst patient outcomes, were often associated with information being hidden, messengers of bad news being shot, bridging between teams being discouraged, covering up failures, right? Why? Because messengers of bad news are shot, and novelty being discouraged. In the middle, we have bureaucratic cultures or just cultures where we create processes to mete out justice, to be merciful. But in the highest, in the best patient safety outcomes, it was associated with what he called generative cultures. We seek information. Messengers are trained to tell bad news, just like in our field, right? We Engineers are trained to take part in blameless postmortems or lead blameless postmortems. We share responsibilities. We encourage bridging between teams because we know that ops time is not just, we know that availability is not just ops's job, just like security is not just security's job. It is everybody's job. When failures happen, it causes a sense of inquiry and new ideas are welcomed. And it was so gratifying in researching the Unicorn Project to really study the work of Project Aristotle and Project Oxygen at Google. And so for years, they had this project really trying to understand what made great teams great. And what they found was the top factor that came up over and over again was psychological safety. In other words, as measured by to what degree do people on a team feel safe to take risks and say what they really think without fear of being ridiculed, made fun of, or ostracized. And so all of this work is out there, and there's a phenomenal book called by Charles Duhigg on what Google now calls Project Rework. So I'm going to show you one thing here. And so one of my area of passion for the last 7 years is studying not so much the Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, and Google. I loved Ross's presentation that said exactly the same thing, right? Is that these practices and principles were pioneered in the tech giants, Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, Microsoft. But the real excitement for me is happening not there, but in how these same practices and principles are being adopted by large, complex organizations across every industry vertical, government agency, and so forth. And so I've been running this conference called the DevOps Enterprise Summit. And in the beginning, we had a kind of a phrase, right? It is a conference not for the unicorns, but for the horses. A conference for horses by horses. No unicorns allowed. And so it's been amazing to collect over 300 case studies spanning almost every industry vertical, just showing how DevOps is not only possible, but these heroic journeys of technology leaders, these amazing acts of rebellion that where they're trying to overthrow an ancient, powerful order that's quite happy to keep working the way that they were working. And so that I put a little thank you to Ross. You framed these obstacles so brilliantly. And one of the best examples of this was this picture I took in, holy cow, 2014. And so this, I was following Heather Mickman O'Sullivan around. She was a senior director at Target, so that's the second largest U.S. retailer, for 3 days. And I saw many exciting things, but perhaps the most interesting thing I saw was this certificate that hung on her desk. And it says Lifetime Achievement Award presented to Heather O'Sullivan Mickman for annihilating TEP and LARB. And so, of course, my first question was, what is TEP and what is LARB? And she explained to me, TEP stands for the Technology Evaluation Process, and LARB stands for the Lead Architecture Review Board. So apparently what this is that whenever you have a new idea, when you want to do things in a different way, you have to create fill out the TEP form, and then you have to pitch the LARB meeting. You walk into a room, and there's one table full of all the dev and enterprise architects, and there's another table of all the ops and security architects, and they pepper you with questions. They start arguing with each other, and then they start assigning you more questions to answer next time around. And her reaction was, why no one on my team should ever have to go through this. In fact, none of the 2,000 engineers at Target should ever have to go through this. Why do we have this process? And she said, no one could really remember. There was something unspeakably bad, like Voldemort in Harry Potter, where there was a vague memory of something terrible happening 20 years ago, but what exactly that was has disappeared in the mists of time. And so due to her endless and relentless lobbying, they disbanded TEP and LARB 9 months later, earning her this incredible certificate that hung proudly on her desk for years and years. And so we tested this in the State of DevOps report. We asked 15 questions along 5 dimensions. To what extent do your leaders have vision? Do they understand the grandest objectives of the organization? Can they get their teams in front of it, not just to be relevant, but help with the achievement of the most important problems? Intellectual stimulation. To what extent does a leader challenge basic assumptions of how we do work? Just because we've done things in the same way for 20 years may not mean that it's the best way to do things today. Inspirational communication. To what extent does a leader inspire pride in being part of the effort? Can they create coalitions around them to help overthrow ancient, powerful orders? Supportive leadership and personal recognition. And what we found was that the bottom 30% of teams that of reported transformational behaviors were only 1/2 as likely to be high performers. So it just says that it can be done, but it's so much more difficult or so much less likely. So we can talk about fun things like blameless postmortems or chaos monkeys, but the point is you just can't do this without psychological safety. So the first ideal is locality and simplicity. Second ideal is focus, flow, and joy. Third ideal is improvement of daily work. Fourth ideal is psychological safety. And the fifth ideal is customer focus. And so in the Unicorn Project, Maxine ponders the notion of core versus context. So core are those core competencies of the organization that create lasting, durable business advantage that customers are willing to pay us money for. And context is everything else. They may be mission critical, but customers aren't willing to pay us for things like cafeteria services or shuttle services or payroll services. They are important, right? They represent some most important obligations we have to our employees, but it's not something that customers directly value. And I think one of the most amazing examples of core versus context was spending a day with Chris O'Malley, the CEO of CompuWare, the famously resurgent mainframe vendor. And the first part of the day was a data center tour, which I kind of was apologizing to my friend Mick Kirsten about. I'm like, why are we gonna spend a morning in the data center, right? I've seen my share of halon extinguishers, and yet it was a profound aha moment, because when you walked into the data center, what we saw was this: it was basically empty. There were 2 Z mainframes because they're a mainframe vendor. And then if you look at the tens of thousands of square feet, there are these green outlines, like in a murder scene, of where the server racks used to be. And in the middle of each one of these outlines is a tombstone that said which business process and application used to live here and how much money did we save by moving it to a SaaS vendor. Things like the EMEA financials, on-prem email, help desk, desktop backup, custom application, password reset. So the net result of doing this is that they were able to reallocate $8 million from context, these back office functions that customers didn't value, into R&D, which creates things that customers do value. And so I think this just represents an amazing example of how we can create genuine business value for the organizations that we serve. So not ideal is when functional silo managers prioritize their silo goals over the business goals. And ideal is that we should all be looking unflinchingly at what we do in our daily work and asking, is this part of core, things that create lasting, durable business advantage, or is this context? And maybe this leads to us asking some tough questions on whether this work is something that we should be even doing internally at all. So why do I think this is important? Is as was described earlier by the wonderful presentation earlier, is that DevOps is not just for the tech giants, for the unicorns, the Facebook, Amazons, Netflix, Googles, Microsofts, and so forth. It is relevant to any organization these days. It is almost impossible to do any active investment without investing in technology as well. And there's this wonderful quote that I love: the world is changing very fast. We are no longer in a world where big beats slow. Instead, it is fast beating slow. And so for large organizations out there, right, there's nothing better than being fast and big, right? In those organizations, that's where you have the customers, you have the channels, you understand the customer, right? This is what is so exciting, that once we can get every developer, every engineer, every technology professional as productive as if we were in a Facebook, Amazon, Netflix, Google, there's no doubt in my mind that this will generate trillions of dollars of economic value per year. So I shared the 5 ideals as a way to talk about these things I think are very important. And I was so happy that when we launched the book in November of last year, it actually hit number 2 on the business hardcover section of the Wall Street Journal. So to me, that a technology book can actually show up on the same shelf as other books that business leaders read is something I got a tremendous amount of gratification with. I just started a podcast where I'm interviewing the people that have influenced my thinking the most over the last 2 decades. That's now available wherever you find your fine podcasts. And we are 4 weeks away from DevOps Enterprise London, now being conducted virtually. So this will be held in London summertime. And I wrote a letter called Love Letter to Conferences, and really studying how much I appreciate and love conferences, how much I owe my career to conferences, and really understanding what elements make for the most meaningful conferences and what are universal and which ones can be revisited in a virtual format. And it was so amazing to put together this 700 pictures of my favorite conference experiences. And so what happens if I click here? It was actually an 11,000 pixel image or just over 9 years. So with that, my thanks to the my amazing hosts here, and I'd love to turn the time back over to, oh wait. So if you're interested in getting the slides from the presentation, getting the link to all of the DevOps Enterprise talks, which are on YouTube, and a whole bunch of other stuff, just send an email to realgenekim@sendyourslides.com, subject line DevOps, and I'll put that out on the Zoom link as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Micah and Liam. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gene.
That was amazing.
A big round of applause for Gene, everybody.
Unmute your mics.
I think there we go. Now everybody can unmute themselves. I assume there will be some questions for Gene, but I'd like to start with a couple that we've got from YouTube. Firstly, from Carl, his question is, do you feel that the principles of the Unicorn and Phoenix projects can be applied to small teams who aren't developing software, but instead are delivering internal IT, such as small office-based companies?
Yeah, I think so. In fact, I would say it's maybe not as relevant when kind of to have something that is a genuine cost center function where you just want to do things the same way, and you want to actually enforce stasis. But if improvement is a part of the goals of the function, and I don't care if it's email or SharePoint or what have you. Yeah, these things absolutely do apply. Because any capability that helps the frontline worker achieve their goals, I think is important. So, and by the way, one of my favorite talks from DevOps Enterprise last year in London was, I'm going to forget his name, but it was from Find My Past, which is, I think just north of 100 people. And it was just an amazing example of really integrating dev productivity into daily work. And just a phenomenal presentation available on YouTube.
And we've got one other from YouTube, from Katie. She asks, out of your published books, do you have a favorite and why?
My favorite is actually Unicorn Project, right? It's sort of like asking, do I have a favorite kid, right? Impossible answer, but I have to say I really love Unicorn Project because it's really an homage to all the heroic work that's being done in the DevOps Enterprise community. I mean, really, it's really meant to tell the story of these incredible rebellions that are happening in large complex organizations. We have these courageous technology leaders, right, who aren't asking for permission, right? They are creating internal greatness, and they're getting promoted at a rate far higher than the population at large, right? Being given more responsibility to make a more meaningful impact for the organization. So I think it is very much born from admiration of this incredible community that's doing just amazing work. And by the way, that you'll see more talks in the virtual DevOps Enterprise, including the Chief Operating Officer of Nationwide Society, from the team at Adidas. There's just really talks that I deeply representing works I just deeply admire.
Fantastic. James, you've got your hand virtually raised. As far as I can
Good
tell.
lad.
Yes.
I like that.
Hi, Gene. Thanks a lot for the great talk and love your work. Read your books, although I will say that sometimes the difference between reality and what's facing can be quite daunting. The concept of situational awareness, you definitely mentioned a military context for with Stanley McChrystal's book, where situational awareness is not just a dashboard or can be gleaned from a very small set of different metrics. It's dynamic. How has that featured as a concept, and and how much would proactive measures to improve situational awareness make a high performing organization perform better even?
Yeah. I think it's absolutely critical, right? That the key theme is that every person in the organization should know how the work they do every day is impacting the most important goals of the organization. And I think that's the intent behind things like what they call it, management by objective or OKRs or whatever, right? I mean, the goal is so that we can cascade down from the largest goals down to the managers down to the manager to the teams, right? And I think without that, you just have a mob, right? So in fact, I am actually talking with one of the teams co-authors tomorrow, right, to better understand that. And really the goal is that capability, just to be able to radiate relevant information to other teams so that we are mutually supporting. And one of the most amazing examples of that is how they were able to cite an Al-Qaeda in Iraq leader and capture them 45 minutes later. And that is, in the old days, would have taken months, and that was done in 40 minutes. It was just incredible. And so I know those analogs exist in our world as well.
Great, thank you.
We've got time for one more. Louise, I think you had a question that you wanted to ask.
Yeah, hi. I was just wondering, out of the 5 ideals, given the current COVID situation and lockdown, is there any one you'd particularly emphasize at the moment as being raised above the others?
Huh. That is a great question. In an age of a global pandemic, oh gosh. Probably psychological safety, I think. I mean, a friend of mine said, this is not working from home. What when we were sheltering in place for the last 2 months, it is not the standard working from home, remote working environment. I mean, we're having to deal. In fact, you just heard my twin 10-year-olds walk in and out. Right? It's like there are a whole bunch of things that we're dealing with in our daily work that we simply didn't have to deal with before. So, I think that it would be hard to say that you can solve those issues without people to have candid conversation on what's working and what's not. So that would be mine, and I sure hope that everyone out there is feeling that. It's not just about physical safety, but psychological safety as well. Incidentally, by the way, one of my key learnings is that the andon cord, what psychological safety must have been created for the andon cord to even work, right? In that General Motors plant, there's so many examples where they install the andon cord, but no one pulls it because when anyone does, right, they get yelled at because they jeopardize the daily production targets, right? So physical safety, psychological safety actually definitely go hand in hand.
Thank you.
Fantastic. So I'd like to once again thank both of our fantastic speakers for taking the time out of their day and or evening, should I say, for coming along to DevOps Nuts this evening. Thank you to all of you guys as well for coming along to take part and listen to our great speakers. Next month, we are meeting on June the 30th. And we have a evening of lightning talks planned around diversity in tech. And the last thing we need to do before we wrap up is, Misha, you need to draw a prize.
I do.
Winner, should I say? Not a prize. It's not a lucky dip, but
I shall. I did have this loaded up. Give me 2 seconds. Right. Just build up a bit of suspense, Liam. Okay.
I'm doing my best.
We can have a bit of a drum roll. Right, who's going to win today? We have... Okay, I'm going to have to draw another one. DevOps Nuts won, apparently. Alan Buxey, come on down. Really looking forward to this evening. DevOps Nuts talks. Jean Kim is presenting too. Smiley face, smiley face, smiley face. That is the tweet that won it for you, Alan Buxey.
Thank you very much.
It's quite all right. The JetBrains.
It's not just your things.
Sorry?
Forward to the JetBrains license.
Oh, excellent. Very good.
Cool. What we'll do to get that out to you is we'll DM you on Twitter with it. So, like I say, once again, thank you very much, everybody, for coming. And we shall see you all on not May the 30th, June the 30th.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming. This has been great.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Thanks, Gene.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Especially
You're all great. Oh, it's cool watching people leave.
Oh, just seeing all the names.
Yeah.
Cool. I think you guys don't do the networking sessions on these ones then.
We've not quite managed to get it working as we'd hope yet. But we
I
will
know
do
on
at
another
some
one,
point.
we used to you have the session at the end. We all network together. Not quite sure how that will work. It's different meetups, different setups.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, no worries.
Well, thanks a lot, guys.
Cheers, guys.
Thanking you. Oh, hey, Benj.
Hey,
Oh,
Benj. There he is.
Thought I'd actually turn my camera on for a minute.
Yeah.
Right at the end. There you go.
Where you had your
Yeah.
hair there, I just wondered if you even had anything on your top. It's good. It's safe. Yeah, exactly.
Doing
yeah.
really cool.
It's hot,
I
man.
like his hair long.
It is.
Yeah,
wrong,
dude,
man.
you look cool.
I work with Benj, by the way, if anyone was a bit confused. Yeah.
He's awesome.
That was a very cool talk.
I've learnt so much.
Yeah.
Trying to keep up with like reading what he was what was on the slides and what he was saying. I was like, I'm so conflicted.
Most people just read from the slide.
Yeah, you know what? One problem I have found with Zoom is that the list of people often usually overlays the slides, and I find I have to keep moving the people around to read what's going on.
Yeah.